So for our next bit, we can put our bag body and all the strap material away because we don't need that for right now. What we do need is our two flap pieces. So our fashion fabric flap and our lining flap. You'll be able to tell these pieces either because you wrote them on there or because they've got these curved like corners on two sides and then regular corners on the other two sides. I labeled mine because I've not used this pattern before, didn't want to mix them up. And because for a while there I was like, this is just the pocket. It's just not the pocket, no matter how many times I said it was. Anyway, so what you're going to do is you're going to place your fashion fabric and lining fabric right sides together. And you're just going to pin them together. So we're planning on stitching along these three edges and leaving this one with the sharp corners, the non-rounded corners, we're leaving that one free because that's how we're going to turn it all inside out and get it ready to go. So, I'm going to pin favoring my stitch line, the line that I marked, rather than the cut edge of my fabric, because the stitch line is what we're following, not the anything else. I'm gonna scoot that over actually, yeah, because you may notice that my marked stitch line does not perfectly match up, or does not perfectly make the edges match up, and that's totally normal. I mean, in an ideal world where I can cut with laser precision, it would not be normal, but that is not this world. That's not the world we're living in. So if you guys figure out how to, like, I don't know, cut everything perfectly all the time, I think you should go into a career path where that is the thing you're doing, because you'll make money. Be a first hand. Cut fabric all day long. So I'm just pinning along this line, following the corners and everything. There we go. You want to make sure that your fabric is smooth and doesn't have any bubbles in it. If you're pinning your fabric and it's lining up, like the seam lines are lining up, but then you've got a lot of bubbles in the middle, that means that something went awry when you were cutting it, and you're going to want to go take your pattern piece and compare it with your fabric piece and compare it with the pattern piece that you use to start with, and see why it's not matching up, because these guys should be the same size. Okay. So I've got these three sides pinned. I'm probably going to put one pin up there. I'm not stitching this side, but it doesn't hurt to have it sort of secure too. And then I'm going to head over to the sewing machine. Over at the sewing machine, we're going to take our pieces, and I'm just going to start on the right side of my fabric so that all the extra bits are hanging off to the left, because that's how I like to sew. And starting at the raw edge of my fabric, so a little before the marked line, I'm going to sew and backstitch. And then once I hit the marked line, I'm going to backstitch again for a few stitches. This just makes it so that when you're taking stuff out, it doesn't have to be all the way undone if you need to adjust something. It's a little grace trick. Now I'm just stitching with a normal stitch length of 2.5, and I'm following the stitch line. This is going to use your the skills you learned during that wonderful curve sewing exercise on the paper with the circles, because you're just going to stitch around the curve that you've got marked there. So to do that, I'm just guiding it with my left hand, basically. I'm going slow as I need to, adjusting as I go to keep my needle on the stitch line. And now the corner's done. And once I reach the end, I'm going to do that same thing where I backstitch at the marked line, and then I'm going to backstitch at the edge of the fabric. And I'm going to cut it off. So this, you should have your bag flap stitched on 3 sides, and this top part is open, And in the next video, I'm going to show you how to clip your seams and then flip it so that it looks all really nice. So now that we've got our flap all stitched, we're going to be doing a process called grading our seams. We're also going to be clipping. So what you're going to need for this is your stitched flap, some scissors, a seam roll, and the iron. So over at the pressing table, you'll have all of those things. And what we're going to start out by doing is just pressing our seams open. So I'm going to bring my little arm board that I use as an ironing board over. In the classroom, you obviously have a bigger surface than this, but I live in a small apartment. There we go. Just pressing it all flat. So this is like a variation on our three-way press, but instead of having it just be a flat piece of fabric, it's a bag flap. So what I'm going to do now is I'm taking the seam roll. I'm going to actually adjust the camera so you guys can see better. There we go. I'm taking the seam roll and I'm placing it inside my bag flap. And this is really convenient because we're going to need to press this corner here, and the seam roll already has a curved corner. So I'm just kind of pulling this until I get it all in there, lying pretty flat, and my seam is sitting nicely against the seam roll, and then I'm just going to press it open. So this is really no different from what we've done with our seam samplers. I'm going to turn our iron down a little bit. And once I get that part done, I'm just going to kind of squish it because I want to get to the corner now that I've gotten one side done. So the purpose of this whole video is getting your flap to lay really nice and really flat. And we're doing a couple different things to ensure that, and one of them is using the seam roll. So I'm using it like that. This is kind of hard to show in a video, if I'm being honest. I was not expecting it to be this strange. But I can always demo it for you in person if you feel so like that would help you. And another thing that's helping me too is that I'm finger pressing it open to begin with, and then I'm bringing my iron over and using it there. And I'm going to scooch the arm roll over. So that's most of what this is just scooching the seam roll around and getting your iron up in there to get it flat. And then I'm going to move it over to the other side and repeat the whole thing. So. Be sure to use the seam roll to really get up in that corner because this is going to help you a lot in your quest for a beautiful bag flap. Okay, so now that that is done, we're going to move on to the next step of our process. Now that my seams are pressed open, it's time for clipping and grading. So we're going to start out with grading, and what that is it's a process of cutting down your seam allowances using scissors in order to make them different lengths so they lie really flat. So right now, if I were to turn this and flip it, I'm going to have a lot of bulk where all my seam allowance just stops at 5/8 of an inch, which is, in its defense, how we sewed it. So in order to prevent that, what we're going to do is we're going to grade our seam allowance. This is really common in the world of clothing because you don't want a big thick line showing you where your fabric stops. So to do this, I'm going to start out by grading my lining fabric to 1/4 of an inch. So I can generally, I've done this enough times, I know what a 1/4 of an inch looks like. If it helps you, you can get your ruler out and mark 1/4 of an inch. And the reason why we're doing it to 1/4 inches is because if we get any smaller, it could undermine our seam's integrity and things could fray. You can see my lining fabric is already a little prone to fraying, so I don't want to get any further down than 1/4 inch because it could wear it through it and make a hole. And I'm just going around the corner. And having pressed these open does make this a lot easier because you're not fighting your other fabric. It's just sort of sitting off to the side. So the end goal of grading is that you're going to have like little stair steps on your fabric in your seam allowance that will make it look much smoother from the outside because it's kind of tapering off where the seam allowance is. So once I've gotten that done, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to grade my fashion fabric to 1/8 of an inch over from my lining fabric. So that's 3/8 of an inch. And I'm actually just kind of closing it up on the seam so that I can use my original round of clipping as sort of a guide. But again, if you want to mark it, you can on this one. Okay, and so now once I've got these graded, we're moving into a process called clipping. So on our bag flap, we've got two different convex curves that are these ones that go like out this way as opposed to going in this way, which dictates what kind of clipping we're going to do. So when you are grading a convex curve, you are going to make little V clippets. This is because if I were to turn this right now, the curve is going to have a lot of trouble bulk-wise, even though we graded it, because there's just fabric doesn't like being made to curve. And so the like life hack to get around that is clipping. So since it's a convex curve, I'm going to do I'm taking little V's out of it. And I want my V to stop 1/4 inch. I don't want it to go in any further because then again, it could make a hole in our bag. And one neat little trick that Grace taught me on this is if you fold it, you can just go snip, and that is a perfect little clip for you. So folding in half, snipping off the end, and I want to do this around the curve. So I can stop once I get to the regular flat part. I'm putting about 4 of these in here, and this is just going to allow my fabric to spread out better, and it's making a compromise between what it wants to do and what I want it to do. Because what I want it to do is to have a beautiful corner that looks real nice and doesn't cause any problems, and what it wants to do is lay flat and be free and not be made to do things. So we're compromising here through the power of clipping. Now, if this was a concave curve where it goes the other direction in, instead of clipping little V's out, I would just go straight down and just make little straight slits in it, which would have the same purpose. So now that I've got like 4-ish clips, I mean, there's no exact science, on each side, I'm going to begin flipping it. So since we've graded our seams and clipped our curves, this is going to look much nicer than if we just gone straight to it, or like if we hadn't pressed it. Every one of these steps has made things a little nicer looking, until we've got a really nice end product. And so with the corners, you're just gonna kind of woodge it out, is the professional term. I'm sure you've all heard it a million times. You're just kind of pulling it until you get your fabric to lay evenly. And then once we've got it turned and lying relatively flat, you'll notice that like, oh, this is kind of peeking out still. And that's because we haven't done the last round of our 3-way press yet. So let's get the ironing board back up here. And for this one, because the next step that we're going to do is we're going to top stitch all the way around this flap. And so before we do that, we've got to press it and get it really nice. But the thing is that we don't want the lining fabric peeking out, because that kind of ruins the illusion. So we're doing what we call a rolled seam, which, or yeah, you're pressing. It's the same kind of stitching. You're not changing the stitching, but when we're pressing it, you want your fashion fabric to kind of peek over on your lining side so that the opposite doesn't happen and your lining doesn't peek over on your fashion fabric side. So when you're pressing, just kind of work it with your hands and get it so that your fabric is lying with the lining hiding underneath the fashion fabric, which for me, it helps to do this with the fashion fabric up, because then I can see what exactly is being shown. Otherwise, it's very difficult to tell where your lining might be peeking out. There we go. And so you'll see what I mean when I flip it over. There's a little peak of my fashion fabric on this side, and then we're gonna top stitch it down all the way around, so that's gonna hold that like in that position forever. So we don't have to worry about it attempting to sneak back out on us. There we go. Okay. Once you've got it pressed all the way around, we're gonna head back to our sewing machine and top stitch this bad boy. Over at the machine, we're going to do just what we did on the bag straps for top stitching, but now it's on the flap. So if you're using a contrasting thread color, be sure to have that so that it matches. If you're using a matching thread color, same thing goes. You want it to be consistent. And we're just top stitching it at 1/8 of an inch. And what this is doing is it's reinforcing your seams so that as you use your bag and love your bag, the seams don't rip out. But also, it looks pretty cool. So it's also decorative, which is fun. And be sure to do the same thing where you're kind of easing it around the corners. Between this part of the video and the last chunk, I did decide to pin a little bit, so you're more than welcome to pin your fabric as you pressed it before top stitching it. It made it a little easier. It didn't try to escape on me. And then back stitch. And so that is it for top stitching your flap. This is what your bag flap should look like now. It's got beautiful top stitching reinforcing your seams. And I am going to take it over to the iron and give it one more press, but I'm just doing it flat, so I'm not going to video that. You'll just press the top stitching that you did flat, make it really set in. And in the next video, I'll be showing you how you're going to attach this to the bag and also how to do a buttonhole. It's going to be really exciting.